Well, I hear that you're all in liberal arts or non-science, so science?
Public health.
Public health. Okay, I'm going to be talking about the National Institute of Health grants, fellowships and grants, and also the National Science Foundation. And the thing to do, while if you can make a case for biomedical significance, then you know that's good. If any of you can make a case for any kind, even remotely, I mean, I've had a number of NIH grants, NSF grants, and currently I have an NIH grant, the Minority Biomedical Research Support Program. We're now in our 33rd year of funding, and we just got a renewal for 5 years. And I make the case that we can define biomedical relevance very broadly. So we have a student who's in social work, and we had a student in environmental sciences who was studying pollution and in Newark, air pollution and admissions to the hospital. The effects of the psychological effects of being a dreamer student. So we can, if you be creative, you can define it broadly. So you know, I hope that I'll be talking about science fellowship and grant applications, but hopefully they can be somewhat, you could make it, you could kind of, some of the principles are universal in grants, so stick with it and see, you may find some relevant pointers, even though it's science types of research. This is I wanted to start with some of the opportunities, because there are different kinds of opportunities. There are the support that you can, where the institution applies for money for a grant, like here, the Minority Biomedical Research Support Program. I applied for the grant, and it supports 10 doctoral students and 10 undergraduate students. So we provide salary and tuition. That's an institutional grant that takes the pressure off you. You just have to apply to the institution, and you get, if they have the grant, then they can support it. That's as opposed to individual fellowship applications or individual fellowships or individual grants, where that's to you in particular. So I wanted to, this is an interesting, relatively new type of grant, institutional grant, called the IRACTA grant, and this could be relevant to everybody, because the idea of the IRACTA, it's an interesting concept. It's postdoctoral. It's a postdoctoral support. So when you finish your doctorate, you can apply to this type of institutional grant, and the idea is to combine research with teaching, mentored research with mentored teaching. So this is a type of grant that is particularly designed to develop to develop professors with expertise in teaching as well as in research. And it's broadly defined. It sounds like it might be specifically for minority postdocs, but probably not. So the idea is that you do research in a research-intensive university, and in order for them to get the grant, they have to partner with a minority-serving institution. So you get a mentor. You get a mentor a research mentor in the research intensive institution, and you get a teaching mentor in the minority serving institution. So one example, so on the IRACTA site, they have this map, and you can click on, these are the locations of where the IRACTA programs are. And I clicked on the one in New Jersey, and in New Brunswick, Robert Wood Johnson has an IRACTA grant. So that means that you could apply to the program director at Robert Wood Johnson, see if they have an opening, and they pair with Medgar Evers College in New York as the minority serving institution. So that's one type. This kind of this is an institutional grant, a postdoc. We would get it's for up to 5 years of research and teaching training. So that's one type of fellowship, a postdoctoral fellowship. There are individual, I'm sorry, the F-31 is another type of purely research, institutional grant for research. Excuse me. It's called a training grant. And again, the institution applies for it, gets a grant to support a number of either graduate students or postdocs. But this is this particular one is pre-doctoral. If you want to say if you would want to transfer out from Rutgers to another institution, you could go to the NIH website, just Google NIH fellowships, and see if they have, see where these institutional training grants are, and you can get into that and get supported. So called the Ruth Kirstein National NRSA pre-doctoral fellowship. That's if you're still a graduate student or a doctoral student, or you want to be a doctoral student. So if you're a master's, you can go, yeah.
So I'm applying to this one in December, and I was wondering
where
for Rutgers. I haven't made it through the SF 424 announcement.
Wait. You don't apply. You apply to the institution.
Right, through I think
Do
it's
they have it?
NCI. They just released a call for applications in March.
The NCI?
Oh, it's actually all of the NIH. You have, depending on what your research is, they're going to pair you with an institute.
But you're applying. You have to apply to a particular school. Where do you want the F-31, right, yeah, okay. Yeah, the F-31 is the individual, they have a whole, list of different types. Yeah, this is the individual pre-doctoral fellowship. So you applied to the NIH for the individual fellowship. Right. So let me just get onto that. So there's also for those of you who will be getting the doctorate, there's the postdoctoral mentored career development award. So when you're a postdoc, you can apply to the NINDS for a postdoc award. The NINDS is, I'll give you a list of, let's see, here's a list of the different institutions, and you mentioned the NCI, the National Cancer Institute. So these are the institutes of the NIH. There are about 20 or so institutes, my grant is through the National Institute of General Medical Sciences. When you apply for a fellowship, like you mentioned the NCI, so you apply for an individual fellowship, you apply through to the NCI, because you click on the NCI, and that will tell you, they will give you all the information that you need to apply for them. When you click on the particular institute that's closest to your own interest. So I'm a neuroscientist, so I would apply to neurological disorders and stroke, or NIDA, National Drug Abuse, or Child Health and Human Development, or Mental Health, NIMH, or NIGMS. So the idea is that each one has its, you have to apply to a particular institute when you want to apply for a fellowship. The one that's closest to your interest, and they all have supplemental instructions. So there's a standard form that everybody, fellowships, grants, everybody uses the same standard form, which is the SF 424. And you get it through grants.gov. So the best thing to do is just Google NIH, fellowships or grants, you get all this information. So everybody uses the same form, but the different institutes have their own special instructions, so always check their supplemental instructions. Very, very important. Then also, though we're talking about those are fellowships. There are grant applications those are called R01 applications. Another thing that probably Ann will talk about is that there are program announcements, and this is relevant to the question you were raising about how do you pick, what Joe was saying is that you have to do what you're interested in and try to get a grant for what you're interested in. And one of the ways of trying to get a match is by checking the program announcements, the PAs, because they very often publish new lists of what the NIH is looking for, what are the questions that they're interested in. So you can check the PAs on the NIH website, the program announcements, and also the RFAs, which are requests for applications, RFA. Because they say, you know, we're interested in opiate rehabilitation. You know, that's a big thing now, opiate rehabilitation. Although, our friend Sessions is trying to turn it into criminal behavior again. But anyway, hopefully the NIH will still persist. So they come up with requests for application. That's a way of finding out what's a good match between what you're interested in and the funding institution. Okay. Now, the NIH also has this the video and this guide as to what how to prepare to apply, write your application, submit it, and if you check this, evidently this particular individual has she's so cheerful that she apparently has never applied for a grant. So, but she's telling you how much fun it is. And she's smiling through the whole process. So, but it's stressful. But you know, that's what we do.
Do you mind going back one slide?
Oh yeah.
No, oh,
Here?
The one with the list. This one.
Yeah.
So, do you have to just specify one, or you can have a cross section of a few of these?
Well, okay, that's a good question. When you pick, say, an institute that looks closest to your interest, the best thing to do is, when you have an idea of what it is that you want to do, call. They always list the program administrator. Give a phone call. They're nice people. Most of the people working at the NIH, I used to work at the NIH. I got recruited from my program. I worked at the NIH doing this kind of stuff for about over 3 years. they're nice people. Most of them are academics. They come from, they were in faculty positions and they got recruited and they have a career at the NIH. So if you tell them what your idea is, what your interest is, they may say, that's relevant to our institute. It's also relevant, let's say you do National Institute of Drug Abuse, and they'll say, it's also relevant to mental health. So if you write your application, we might co-fund it. And they do this all the time. They co-fund, two different institutions, two different institutes of the NIH can share the cost of the fellowship or the grant. So it's very common that they do that. But this is something that the program director, who you speak to, based on the contact information here, they will guide you. They'll say, well, what you're suggesting is really more relevant if you ought to call NINDS, neurological disorders of stroke, because if you're talking about rehabilitation, but it sounds more like brain damage instead of drug addiction, so they would be more relevant. They can direct you based on what it is that you want to do.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Perfect. Thank you.
And you were asking about dates and when to apply for what.
Correct.
The NIH has the standard due dates for different types of grants and fellowships. So here are the fellowships, the F series. This is the F31, and they call it diversity fellowships also. So this is the NIH is encouraging that there are groups that are underrepresented in biomedical research. Classically, they're defined by the NIH as Black, Latino, American Indian, and Pacific Islander, which includes Guam and the Philippines, not Hawaii. So those people from those groups are considered to be underrepresented. Now they also are considering people with disabilities and people with economic disabilities, or not disabilities, economic problems. So you have to make a case for your particular condition. So the diversity kind of was set aside to encourage a more diverse workforce. May as well take advantage of it if you can make a case for it. And if you make a case for whatever your disability could be, a student just asked me if attention deficit disorder is a disability. I don't know. I told her to call the NIH and find out if they would consider that to be a disability. That gives you somewhat of an advantage in the highly competitive. It is very competitive. I mean, now it's ridiculous. I don't want to discourage you, but it is really ridiculous that something like grant for the research grants, which is the R01. This is R01 is that's the regular research grant, the investigator-initiated grant that it's not in response to a program announcement, not in response to a request for applications. You say, I have a brilliant idea. This is what I want to do. It's an R01. So now I think the likelihood of getting it is something like maybe 10% of the applications. Well, I'll get to that about the idea of applications and reviews.
So what does the cycle 1, cycle 2, and cycle 3 mean?
That means that for each of these different types of grants, so here's a fellowship. Here is the K series is the postdoc. R1 is the research grant. it means that they have 3 deadlines per year for the different types. So for a research grant, March 5th, July 5th, and November 5th, those are the deadlines. You can submit a grant application at any one of those 3 deadlines during the year, as opposed to the fellowships, which are different dates. So it doesn't swamp the NIH. They stagger them according to different types. So it's important to know when the deadlines are. So in an application for a fellowship, I just want to go through some of the things that you have to pay attention to. What do they want? What do they want to know? Because this is general. I mean, it's probably going to be true of any kind of fellowship or grant application. In the case of a fellowship, you're going to be doing it, excuse me, at an institution with a faculty sponsor. Somebody's going to be the mentor for you. So you have to make an explanation, provide an explanation of why do you want to go to that particular institution with that particular person. So the best thing, if you have that idea, if there's somebody in a particular institution who you want to work with, contact that person and ask that person if they're willing to sponsor you. And because they have to write a letter of support saying that they're interested in having you as a student if you get the fellowship, that they would provide lab space and, they have to, and training, yeah.
So this is all like pre-doctoral fellowships?
No,
Is that
this
what
could be a
you're talking
postdoc.
about?
It could be a postdoc.
It could be a postdoc?
It could be pre-doc and postdoc.
Okay.
Yeah. It's for postdoctoral fellowship. So pick an institution, pick an individual who you want to work with, and then contact that individual and say that you want to work with that person, and then ask them if they'd be willing to tell them what you want to do, what you want to learn, what your background is, and they may have maybe an interview. At the level of a postdoc, this is all very individualized. There's no standard. It's not like interviewing undergraduates for graduate school. It's nothing like that. It's a much more individualized kind of thing. But if you're a master's and you want to go into a doctoral program, then again, contact a person who in an institution who you think you'd like to work with, and try to get an one-on-one interaction. Because that person is going to sponsor your fellowship, the faculty member has to write a support and what that person is willing to, what kind of investment of time and resources they can put in to support you and all that. So it's a two-way street for a fellowship. Okay. For research grants and for fellowships, what they ask for is hypothesis, the specific aims that you want to, what it is exactly that you want to do, and how you're going to do it, and discussing problems, how you manage the problems, what the pitfalls are, and what happens if your brilliant idea doesn't work. What would you do as an alternative? Or how would you recover from it? So I suppose that, I don't know if that is very different from other types of non-science applications, but I mean, it's not so different. Okay, so these are things that you should consider in your application. Now, the NIH is extremely specific, and there are two, I would say, the two most important elements in a grant application, fellowship or research, is this is the specific aims, which is what you're going to do with your hands. And it's limited to one page. But this is a very, the nice thing about the NIH, as opposed to the NSF, which I'll get to a little bit later, the nice thing about the NIH is that they tell you exactly what they want. The NSF seems to be laid back and, hey man, just tell us what you want to do and, it's cool. But they're just as strict as the NIH and probably have fewer resources, so it's even tougher, yeah.
Will this PowerPoint be distributed?
Yeah, I'll post it, we could, whatever way of distribution.
Because I was trying to copy down the,
Oh, don't,
the stuff for, oh.
no,
Okay,
just listen.
thank you.
It's up to Mark, however you want to post it or distribute it or print it. Whatever. Mark is the expert in this stuff, so. So specific aims is this is very challenging. This is the most important part of the grant because, the way the grant review works is that your grant goes to a panel of experts, supposed experts, we'll get to that, and there's a primary reviewer, a secondary reviewer, and a tertiary reviewer. And the primary describes the project, the secondary says, I read it and I have some comments about it, and so does the third, the tertiary reviewer. And the other 10 or so people on the panel, everybody has to read every grant or fellowship application and vote on it. So, but you get dozen or 2 dozen applications for a round when you're a reviewer. I've been a reviewer on the NIH and NSF grants. You get a whole bunch of applications and areas that you're not your expertise. You may have a couple that are in your area of expertise that you're the primary reviewer on. All the others you have to read. And typically, the most important thing to read in the grant application is not the abstract, but the specific aims. Because the specific aims is 1 page. They won't accept it if send back your application if it's more than 1 page. This is electronically done. They have robots doing this. 1 page, and you have to say what it is what's the premise of the project, what's the problem, what are you going to do, and what does it all mean? And you have to do that. That is the most difficult part of a grant application. I've taught a grant application course, and the students have a tremendous amount of difficulty doing this, to get it all in 1 page, because typically what they do, they start with an introduction. This is this is what other people have done and all that. That's not the specific aims. They don't care about that. If they want to know about that, if the reviewer wants to know about that, they read the introduction. But what they want to know is, what are you going to do, and why, and how is that going to advance the field? And to put all that in 1 page takes a long time and a lot of work to get it all concise, succinct, and all the information has to be there. So spend a tremendous effort if you're going to do a grant like this. But probably other grant applications have a similar kind of thing, because it's a universal issue. The second most important thing is and the NIH, they used to use the word gap, identify a gap in the literature. They don't use that term anymore, but that's a really very clever. It's really a very clever concept to identify the gap in the literature, because what that means is that you have to know the literature in your field, and you have to say what is missing. And then you have to say, well, it's missing, but I know how to fix it. I know how to answer the question that is not answered, that needs to be answered, because this is a gap. And that takes knowledge, and it takes creativity. Plus, in your specific aims, you're going to say how you're going to solve the problem. So this takes a lot of thinking, a lot of brain work two things: the identifying a gap and writing the specific aims. Because in the specific aims, you can write a couple of sentences identifying a gap, but don't spend any time on that, because they just want to know what you're going to do. You can establish the premise very succinctly. You know, we don't know, here's this big problem of a big uncontrollable pain, and nobody knows how to solve the problem. No, there's been no effective treatment. People give antidepressants, doesn't work. We've identified a particular type of lesion that if we remove that problem, then the pain is gone. So that's a premise that there's a problem, a way of solving it. And even it's best if you have some preliminary data. But anyway, that's the idea. And then you say what you're going to do. What are the actual experiments that you're going to do? All in one page, single space. And by the way, I remember one time I was reading this application. I'm reading it, and finally I turned the page. I said, that took an awfully long time to read that page. And I realized that they used something like 8-point font, and no lines. There was about twice as much information on a page than single spaced, because the small font and no spaces between the lines. And now they say the font that you have to use and the single spacing. And actually, there was some issue a couple of days ago that some grant was turned back, and the investigator complained, and they said, well, you did single spacing, and we specified double spacing. Or, you know, they have scanners that will send back your application if you don't do it, if you don't follow their rules. So just follow. For an NIH grant, they tell you exactly what to do and do it, and as opposed to the NSF. We'll get to that. So I'm going to go. So what's in the fellowship or a grant? What's the importance of the problem or barrier instead of a gap? How are you going to solve it? What will be the advantage if you solve the problem? Fellowships you don't have to have an innovation if you're a fellowship. Okay. Wait till you're a scientist. Wait till you're professional. When you get your degree, then you have to say what the innovation is. Okay. But if you have an innovation as a fellowship, that's even better. So what your strategy is, the methodology, and problems. This is the kind of stuff that they want you to put into a fellowship or a grant application. Any pilot data that you have, or any preliminary kinds of findings, any of that. So this is the additional instructions. Pay attention to that, because that's something specific to the different institutions that they want. They'll tell you what they want to see in your application that's different from the standard. So these are just probably applies to anything. The significance of what you want to do and the innovations that you are claiming that you're going to be providing. That's the research strategy part. Okay. So that's the NIH. They tell you exactly what they want. The NSF, the National Science Foundation. The difference between the NIH and the NSF in their mission. NIH is biomedical. Things that are related to biomedical research. The NSF is the National Science Foundation. That's STEM. That's science, technology, engineering, and math. So they're more interested in not so much biomedical implication, although they support biology. But I remember I submitted a research grant to them on pain blockage, and they said they're not interested in pain. Pain is biomedical, so go to the NIH. But that would be a way of not wasting time. You know, if you consult with the program directors in your area, they'll tell you that's not what we're interested in. I mean, the NSF, you know, pain is it's science, but they're not interested. They say go to the NIH. So this is the graduate fellowships. Now, if you can get a pre-doctoral fellowship, I think if you're into 1.5 years into a graduate program. But you should check with, if you're interested in a National Science Foundation fellowship, check with the program director. This is a video, and they go through all these all the stuff, how to apply, what they're interested in, what the eligibility is, how the review works, and how to submit the application. So it's the videos are helpful. But again, I should say that the NSF sounds much more laid back, but it's not. It just sounds that way. So again, this is what they want in the fellowship or the grant proposal. Summary, the description of the projects, the references, your biography, and a budget. You have to also think in terms of what money you need, and they give a list of what is eligible, what are allowable and non-allowable costs. So check all that, and then this would be something that the where you're going, the institution where you're going would make a case that they have the appropriate facilities and equipment and other resources for you. So that's the NSF. And here's an example where the NIH gives you specific things about exactly what they want you to cover on each of they have paragraphs on each of the components. This is about the extent of the NSF. Tell us about the work, the broad design of activities, where a description of what you're the methods and procedures, what you want to do, why you want to do it, how you plan to do it. You know, but if you don't do it right, it's much harder to get an NSF grant than an NIH grant. It's even the funding is even more restricted. And now this is something new that the NSF wants. An interesting thing, probably because of congressional criticism, the broader impacts. How is it going to help society? So you can read through this. Increase public scientific literacy, public engagement with science and technology, improved well-being of individuals in society. This is something new that the NSF. I'm sure it's to mollify Congress, but this is something that is a big deal now with the NSF. That in your grant application, you have to explain all this and how it's going to benefit society. Now, something that's very useful, and this is probably true of any grant in any field, is to look at the instructions given to the reviewers. This tells you what the reviewers are looking for, as opposed to what the instructions are. So the NIH actually publishes the instructions to the reviewers. So you can see. So here's in the training grant. This is for fellowships. The reviewers are given these instructions, and what's the, so the F31, this is the individual fellowships. How good are the, and they score it. How, you know, on a scale of 1 to 9, each of these items is, each reviewer is required to give a score in each of these categories for the particular type of application, depending on their assessment of the applicant, how good is the sponsor and the collaborators, how good is the training plan, what's the potential output, what's the environment, and of the institution that the student, that the postdoc or graduate student is going to. Those are actually review criteria. And then they're considered, they're not scored, they don't give numbers for these things, but they're considered. How good is the IRB application? Do they have adequate inclusion of women and minorities and children? All these kinds of things. And then additional review criteria. So these are considerations for fellowships, and for grant applications, for research applications like the R01. Here's the R01. The R01. The significance, what's the background of the investigators? What about the innovation, the approach, the environment, the research environment? That's the overall impact, and then additional criteria. So these, and you can, and if you click on those, they will tell you even more detailed what they're looking for, what the reviewers should be looking for, and this is a great guide to your to what you should say in your application, because you know you may come up with something that the reviewer is instructed to look for that you didn't even think of as something important in your application. So it's a good way of getting up to speed, understanding what it is that the reviewers will be judging. So to finish up, this is, I call it the Goldilocks effect. There's the reviewer psychology. Having been on review committees, there's one problem is that the application that the primary reviewer gets, or any reviewer gets, is too far from their interest. So, you know, because one of the things that they score is their enthusiasm. What is your enthusiasm? This is a question that the chair of the panel asks. What is your overall enthusiasm for this application? On a scale of 1 to 9, 1 being the best. And, you know, if the application is too remote from the reviewer's interest, there's a tendency to give it a lower, to be less enthusiastic about it. You know, there are more important things for us to be funding. So if it's too far, it's not good. If it's too close, it's too close for comfort. Oh, well, he says he wants to use this dose of, you know, his dose is too high. That's a non-physiological dose, and that's going to screw up the entire experiment. You know, he should be using 0.75 of the dose instead of the dose that he's suggesting. In other words, you can get picked apart if what you're proposing is too close for comfort to the individual reviewer. Then they will pick it apart and say, well, my enthusiasm is not high because this person, you know, he didn't read my latest paper. And you know, he doesn't know that, you know, we've already done something like that, or whatever reason, it could be too close for comfort. They're not supposed to do that, but you know, it's psychology. So it can be too close for comfort. So if it's not too close and not too far, then the reviewer can be enthusiastic about it and say, this is really nice. This is nice. This should be done. That's a nice study. So, but that's the luck of the draw. You can't control who gets it, who gets the application. So it's you know, I've, when I was on the a review panel for the NSF for over 3 years, and we would get approximately 35. The panel, we had about a dozen people on the panel. We would get about a total of about 35 applications each round, twice a year. We'd be assigned, I would typically get, say, 8 or 10 applications that I was a primary reviewer on. And each person would say, will come out with maybe, say, 1 or 2 applications that really, this is really great. And so we had 12 people on, so there would be about maybe 6 or 8 applications that were really, really important, really great. That people agreed about, you know, it was just, it really has, these studies have to be done. And then we come back the next session, you know, 6 months later, and, you know, of the 6 or 8 that we said, these absolutely have to be funded, these are top quality, 2 or 3 got funded, because we get a list of which ones actually got funded. So it's a crapshoot. You never know. You never know, you know, it could be great, but if it, for whatever reasons, the panel could be enthusiastic, but the administrator only has limited resources, can't get all funded. So it's very, very frustrating. And, you know, it's frustrating to me. You know, it takes a day to do each application, to review each application. You get 10 of them, it takes a long time. You go get there, it's a Tuesday meeting. You make recommendations, these 2, 3 applications are top, they have to be funded. You come back next year or 6 months later, and none of those got funded. So it's frustrating to the reviewers as well. So, so you never know. Just it's really it's a luck. And I had a wonderful grant officer at the NIH, Danuta Kotowski, and she said, one thing is sure, you won't get the grant if you don't apply for it. Mm-hmm. So keep trying. That's the game.